welcome back to the ERP perspective. I'm with Jonathan Lee, following our full podcast, ERP for SMEs, Context over Chaos. Today, we're going to go into ImplementERP.AI for a full demonstration, and I'll hand you back over to Jonathan now.
Yeah, George, appreciate the opportunity. Very excited to show you what it is that we do and what we work on from an ERP management perspective. So, George, here's what the landing page looks like. And what I want to point out is that it's not just for ERP and it's not just for one phase of ERP. So, for example, we have a pure process optimization usage of this. And then, of course, go into ERP in the 4 lifecycle phases we've been talking about: requirements gathering, system selection, implementation, and then post-implementation when you do your optimization waves. And one other quick thing I want to sneak in is this is also a good tool to assess your current ERP system. So if anyone's interested, I'm happy to spend some time showing the various usages of the tool. Let's jump into the most common, biggest volume one, which is ERP implementation, right? That's the one that's going to take a lot of effort, a long time. So if you notice in the dashboard, from your landing page, you have 2 views. You have a process readiness view, and then you have a traditional ERP implementation activities view, right? Such as integrations and additional requirements, which cover concepts like workflow and security and things like that. And we'll go into this a little bit more, but this is how you capture that long-standing 30-year waterfall type view of stuff that you're doing in the ERP project. This is, though, the big difference. Not a lot of people or tools can tell you that you're overall 92% ready to launch your processes on an ERP system. So on a record to report, for example, well, how is it saying that it's 75% ready? Your quote to cash, how is it saying it's 94% ready? How is all this stuff being calculated and tabulated? Okay. And I'm going to go into this a little bit deeper as we go to next pages. Any questions so far, George?
Not at this point. I was just thinking regarding SMEs. So they sign up for ImplementERP.AI, and you've got functions here from start to finish. So not just the readiness for implementing a new ERP system. I know we'll get onto this in a second, but also for hypercare as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it is start to finish, and it's a tool that's designed to last through your entire life cycle. So probably somewhere between 4 and 7 years would be an anticipated usage if you want to keep all of your information on the system so that you don't have to start from scratch every time you move into a new phase. Great question. Okay, so let's talk about where these processes come from. And this is one of the things we talked about last time. So for SMEs, a lot of them don't understand the concept of the mega processes. So record to report, there's a specific label, and Fortune 500 has been using this for decades now. Quote to cash, order to cash, procure to pay. And the reason they do that is because you need to have an A to Z definition of all the stuff that's needed to complete a transaction. So for the report, it has to do with your financial reports, right? So trial balances, monthly closes, quarterly statements. That's where you would capture this. So underneath the name of the major or mega process, you then have sub-processes. Now, where this starts to connect to the system is it says, well, as you're evaluating your current ERP, evaluating a new one during a system selection or implementing, underneath each of these sub-processes, you're listing the name of the screen. In this example, this is a new implementation. So you're rolling out Infor Cloud Suite or you're rolling out NetSuite. It's naming the screens that are necessary to perform that's a process. And this is the inventorying and the process to system mapping that I was referencing, right? I'm going to take a slightly more popular and convoluted one called quote to cash. This is from the time that you either generate a lead and then give them a quote, and then they say yes, and you create the order, you ship the order, and you get paid, right? So that's where these sub-processes get designed. You're managing leads, you're managing opportunity, you're doing something like quoting, like CPQ, on and on. You create an order, schedule the order. So I'll just jump to the end. You invoice, you're getting paid. And so now you're posting the payment from the invoice. So this is a full life cycle, A to Z, from the time that you're quoting something to an outside party, whether it's a prospect or a customer, to the time you get paid for it. mega process. So when you define the sub-processes necessary to perform that mega process, you then start to list out the screens that are necessary to perform each of the sub-processes. And hence you have the inventory of all the screens you need, and then the system, the process mapping. You have the system below, the process, sub-process above. I'm going to go into the only real, I would say, heavy work involved piece of the entire tool, which is to click on one of those forms, and there below you go into what's called a screen tracker, right? What is a screen tracker? This is where you're assessing the standing of a screen, aka form, page, pane, depending on what system you're using. And so first of all, you have an owner. So I own the responsibility to make sure that this screen is properly reviewed, developed, and then ready to go live. In this case, it's already complete because I already did the task. It shows me what process this screen is supporting, and a little bit more specifically, what sub-process this screen would be supporting, right? And the screen is opportunities. So in Infor Cloud Suite, it's called opportunities. NetSuite D365 called opportunity record. Bottom line is, as I'm implementing one of those systems, I need to go page by page, screen by screen to make sure that those are all ready to go. Okay. Again, this is the only one that requires any what I would call significant effort. It allows you to put in a comment on what this screen does. If you have any attachments, whether it's instructions, scripts, what have you, it allows you to upload to this particular page so that you can see what it is that's relating to or referencing this. So a lot of documentation and such. Are there any integrations that are necessary? And this is the additional requirements piece I alluded to a little while ago. Are there any security efforts needed from a configuration standpoint? Workflow we should be considering. If so, this is where you would put those. Okay. Now, a lot of times you won't have these three at all. And then down below is where the magic starts to happen. And follow me here.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I being the one that's telling the overall project in the company, this screen in Infor Cloud Suite called opportunities. I've reviewed it. The review is complete. Do I need changes based on what I see out of the box? Yes, I do. And so I said, I need a new field. Okay. When I do that, down below, it automatically says, I'm going to put that need in to a design step, a build step, and a test step. Now, why am I going to do that? Because if it's not ready to go out of the box, I have to somehow share to the functional consultant, on the SI side, that I need something. In this case, something simple. I need a new field. So the consultant then does a design, builds it out, tests it. Oftentimes it's one 15 or 20-minute conversation. So it looks like it's convoluted. It's really not from an activity standpoint. It could be happening all on one day. And then I, as the super user, the person that approves this, say it's ready. Okay. Then that screen is ready to go. Later on, there's just a reminder here that says you need to do a cutover prep step and a conference pilot step. So again, this is a little bit of activity, but this is what tells the rest of the team in the outside world, the opportunities screen in my system is now ready. We can move on. And going back to that processes, that's why it has that check mark. So as all of these reviews of all of these screens say it's complete, has a green check mark, I know that the sub-process is fully supported. And once all the sub-processes are fully supported, so all these green checks across the box, then my quote to cash is ready. And this will go from 94% to 100%. So again, there's a little bit of work involved, but it tells a detailed story, especially around processes that other tools and just other methods don't. So any questions or thoughts, George?
Yeah, I was just thinking on my side, it's as close as it can be essentially to a foolproof way of implementing an ERP system. It's like, I know you mentioned there's a little bit of work, but it's that preparation to get you ready.
Yeah.
Essentially, I know obviously the process readiness, but yeah, it's as close to foolproof as possible. And a full process I had for an SME, how many accounts can an SME have for this tool, and how much visibility could a team have when working with this system?
Yeah, great question. So there should be anyone and everyone working on the project should have a seat and be tracking their work on this. We talked last time about trying to eliminate emails. So if I'm a PM and I want to know how we're tracking against the project, I don't want to send emails. I want to go in here and take a look, right?
Mhm,
Also, though, and this is a very big part of your question, if I'm a
mhm,
CEO or if I'm a CFO and I'm not day to day involved in this, but I want to check once in a while, again, I don't want to email people. I don't want to call people. I want to go in here and say, wow, look, we're looking pretty good on quote to cash. We're looking really good on procure to pay. And so I'm feeling either comfort or discomfort based on what percentage it is. And so here I'm feeling pretty good because we still have a little bit of time left. And so I'm saying, okay, 8% left overall. We got a couple months left. Yeah, that's tracking. It makes sense. Okay. But to go a little bit deeper into your question, this is where a PM, other people could go too, but PM would go, this is called a status center, right? So since everyone's tracking their activity on the tool, this is the opportunity for you to say, okay, I want to see how we're doing. So you could go as specific as just one screen. There's a screen called opportunities. I want to see how we're doing there. Okay. I pulled it up. It's self-populated. It looks like it's complete. Great. Okay. But let's not go and find out how we're doing by single screen because that's one out of probably 700. I want to go and just check where we haven't even started on something, right? Ooh,
mhm,
look, there's a lot of stuff that we have listed here that hasn't even been started, right? And now I'm like, well, I'm going to go 1% at a time. So I'm going to see by person. All right. So it looks like John has two of those maybe 20 or 30 forms where they haven't even started the review. And so I'm going to go call him. And now I have info. There's two screens that he owns that he hasn't even started the review process on. So this is where you actually have information before you go and start calling. And it really eliminates a lot of cadence calls, but it makes the existing remaining cadence calls necessary. So if you see there's a lot of areas from which you can filter. I think a very popular one would be by process. How many screens and forms do I have in procure to pay for direct materials? Oh, look, I have 4 so far, right? So this is a really useful tool to start to hone in and use that filtering concept to know where I want to go have the conversation. But this eliminates the research to then go have those conversations. Right? So great question. Any
mm.
other questions on this one?
Not on this particular page. I was just thinking to myself, as you're someone leading an ERP project, so you've got several consultants. For a project manager, I think, as you mentioned, it saves a lot of time than chasing people to where they're up to and things like that. If they can just log in and see, what the status is, how close they are to complete, or how ready that area is. And it
Yeah.
saves that project manager a lot of time to actually see who they need to contact, why, and it's all in one place, which I can imagine for a project manager who's got about a million tasks every single day to log into this, it might give them a bit of ease and comfort and structure of where the team needs certain support areas.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, a couple other things that questions have always revolved around, but there were never answers, and that is around scope. So, I mentioned before that a typical full system implementation is probably between 400 and 2,000 screens. However,
Mm,
the questions that sometimes get asked, and everyone kind of shrugs their shoulders, well, what is the volume of screens that we're working on? So in this demo example, it's obviously limited. So I've only built out like 75, and it shows that are 16 scripts that are necessary of the 75 screens that are involved in this. But in reality, you would add zeros to this, right? Be 750 screens. Of those screens, 160 require scripts for users to reference. You would add a zero to this. So about 100 integrations to make the system be able to pull in or shoot out data to the necessary databases, right? And then to go a little bit more deeply. So, well, how many screens do I have for record the report? How many do I have for quote to cat, right? How many integrations and scripts and all that, process by process by process. So the first thing it tells you is which processes are complex or complicated from the definition of the system, not the definition of, let's say, process consultant. And that's really telling because it tells you where the volume of activity is likely going to be, right? So that's very helpful. But going back to the top, I like just to get the summary, to capture all this at the very top, how many we have. But also, now this is where just taking a look at a little bit the detail down below, it says stuff like, how many are done. So using the real life example, it'd be like 190. Late is 20. Complete is 540. These are the gut check, acid test, whatever label you want to use that tells people how we're doing overall. And then if they want to see the detail, they can. If they don't want to see the detail, by the way, they can collapse and just see the inventory of the processes. But once they want to go see the detail, they expand and they start seeing like how many screens or forms are involved in making record to report work. How many integrations are there? How many more layers like workflow and security do we have to work on in order to make record to report work? And again, at the summary level, it's all built out here. So you could see it here. And again, at the CFO, CEO, let's say VP of sales who wants to have nothing to do with the rollout, but wants to understand how to know, how to check on whether his sales processes, so whether it involves quoting or is just a straight order, how those are tracking and whether he should be or she should be comfortable, they could start right here. So in a nutshell, George, those are the details and the basics and the foundational pieces of the tool. And I know it's a lot to wrap your head around. It does require a little bit of training to get this going, but once everybody is tracking their activity here, and then the PM is benefiting by receiving this information, being able to track the status based on something that allows him or her to filter. It just changes the world entirely. And again, this is context because you do it by not only process, but even by sub process, like how many screens are necessary in the system so that our opportunity management is going to work from a sub-process standpoint in real life. So I'm going to stop here, take a breather, and see if you have any questions or any specific functionality you want to see more of, George.
Yeah, no, I think the demonstration's been fantastic. I was just thinking from an audience watching the full podcast, learning more about Implement ERP AI, those SMEs that are either selecting a new ERP system or maybe even brand new to ERP. What stage would you recommend they reach out to yourself or apply maybe for a direct demo of Implement ERP.AI?
Yeah, terrific question. Great one to kind of, wrap up the discussion and bring it all into perspective. That's perfect. So it's never too early, right? Because first of all, we talked about how companies sometimes prematurely jump to conclusions. So if they're a company that has some sort of a system in place, even if it's AS400, it's just super ultra outdated, just to start to identify specific areas of where their current system is falling apart and has major gaps and all that, I would start here. It's a current ERP system assessment. It looks exactly the same from a template standpoint as what you just saw, but the focus is to identify where in your current system those gaps are. Now, assuming that the person, the company has to move forward, there's just too many weaknesses. So we're going to transition this. We're going to flip this, not start from scratch. We're going to flip this and then take all of the useful information. It's going to be a requirements gathering tool now, slightly different bent, same data. So you need to just add a little bit more to what you've accumulated so far. And when you've done that, you now have 98% of the content to shoot out in an RFQ or RFI to do the system selection. So as you're gauging the NetSuites and the Acumaticas of the world and D365, same data. Now you're using it though in an ERP system selection format. So now you're going to be putting some notes in those screens that I just showed you that shows, the rating and the scoring for the various systems that you've been implementing. Now, when you pick one, the great thing is there's that back and forth in system selection where they kind of self-identify where they're not strong, or which forms are going to be necessary and all that kind of stuff. And where you might have to buy some third-party add-ons. But when you guys have that conversation and you beef up the scoring content, you now have, believe it or not, a lot of the design done for the ERP implementation itself. And without going into it and opening up another 10-minute segment, I'll just say this. The wonderful thing I've noticed, George, and I think a lot of other consultants like me have noticed, is because companies are so open to that out-of-the-box concept, and because the systems have become so strong, so wonderful, Not a word I would have used 15 years ago. But now there's so many systems that I truly think are just terrific, really, really great. So now it's more about, like, what are we going to have to personalize? We need to change out the order of the column headers in a table and a form. No big deal. It's the personalization step, right? So when the ERP implementation starts off, if you've done all this stuff in this tool, believe it or not, you're 50% from a process readiness standpoint. It could be 75, 80% because you've already had those engaging specific conversations with the implementation team about their system and learning how it works and where their shortcomings might be and honing on which screens and where in the system some extra work is going to be needed. But all those many, many, many screens where that extra work isn't really going to be needed. So it's just a tremendous place to come together and have those conversations. Great question.
Fantastic. And what are the next steps then? I mean, someone from an SME watching this at the moment, maybe CIO, head of ERP, or even a consultant, and they love what they've seen today. What are the next steps of implementing this into their business, getting in touch with you, and moving forward with this software?
Yeah, absolutely. So relating to the software, they can contact info at ImplementERP, and they can also reach me directly, jonathan.lee at ImplementERP.AI. And another thing is just you can go to the website, ImplementERP.AI, and fill out a form, and we'll get in touch. Probably I'll get in touch with that person directly. Best thing to do is have an hour conversation about their situation and how the tool applies to their specific need based on their current challenges, and then have a conversation about whether it's needed or not. And we'll give great advice and just talk about methodologies, even if they decide the tool is not right for them. And so it's really that engaging dialogue that we welcome.
Fantastic. Perfect. And I know an aspect you mentioned there on the training side. And I know obviously it's a fantastic tool and there's a lot of benefits of using it. You mentioned obviously a slight bit of training when someone first joins, and as an ERP leader, you might think obviously we don't want to be too complicated, we want to be quite easy to learn. That training process, is that done by someone at Implement ERP AI, or how does one learn how to use the software to the best of its capabilities?
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. So one of us would be providing that training and overview. And we also offer limited services if they want to do, let's say, a monthly cadence meeting where someone from our organization works with them to take a look at the project, see if the tool is being used correctly, and just give guidance and advice. So it could be just 2 or 3 hours a month. We want to keep it bite-sized. And not only will they get guidance on how to properly use the tool, but they'll get guidance on the project management as a whole and some good steps on how to correct themselves and get back on track. And, one of the quick mentions here is it just seems like the business world has gone so deep in risk management. So it's not just racing matrices, but you have like MOCHA and you have, Rapid and RASI and all this other kind of stuff. And those are amazing concepts, but we think it's going in the wrong direction. Instead of building up complexity on risk management, something like this minimizes and eliminates risk to begin with. So we want to build in security in the foundational level or layer like this tool allows. So quick comment there.
100%. I think it's a lot easier to prevent risk than deal with it.
Yeah, and it goes back to that context, right, George? If what sub-process and process a form, a screen rolls up to, if you have an identified owner of that, and you tell them, it's a change on the screen, or no, it's an integration, or no, you just need to modify a script and finalize a script. And that context going to the system, map to the sub-process and the process. Again, it sounds tedious at first, but that mechanical view, just like architecture and buildings, is what provides clarity long term. And we're very passionate about that.
Fantastic. Perfect. I've not got any further questions for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to highlight on ImplementERP.AI?
Just get in touch with us. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And you're just hugely grateful to you and your team, George, the work you're doing to spread the word around ERP and to just make it a more fun, enjoyable, successful field instead of, associated with pain and difficulty. What you're doing is remarkable.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So this has been ImplementERP.AI, ERP for SMEs. context over chaos. As mentioned, I highly recommend to reach out directly to Jonathan Lee, and I'll put a link to ImplementERP.AI below this video so you can have a look at the website directly. And thank you again, Jonathan, for joining the ERP perspective.
Thank you, George.